curious. There. She followed him and soon found herself falling a very deep hole into a strange place called Curious.
Conversation.
Curious.
Conversation.
Nowadays, there are still girls and boys whose curiosity leads them to strange places.
All right. Thank you, all three of you, for joining me. And first of all, I just want to address, one, the topic that we're talking about, and two, why I reached out to each of you. So my intention with today is to talk about cultural appropriation, as this is a journey that I've been on and I think is very important in the community that I'm within and who I talk to. And I want to learn more, and I know the three of you have some really unique perspectives on it that I can learn from. So Illuminati Congo, why I reached out to you is I believe you represent a lot of eclectic culture. Like I see that you come from different areas and put it into one, and I see that it feels quite organic. Like I see you, and I don't think you're reaching for any other demographics, that you're just being you, whilst having such a vast knowledge on being able to show up and talk about the different topics. And what I like about that as well is that you can go all the way in on a topic and be quite educated and open, but also zoom all the way out and have the spiritual wider perspective on both. And I really appreciate both those sides, because I want to be able to see out and get a wider perspective, but also get those minute things that maybe I don't fully understand. And then I also appreciate your ability to both be serious and funny at the same time. You know, like in one day you might say something that triggers the fuck out of me, and in the next moment I'm having a laugh at something, and sometimes I'm triggered and laughing, which is great for learning, you know.
For sure.
So I'm really excited to have you in here to talk and give those perspectives to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Luka, why I reached out to you is because late last year I put up a status / post on Facebook and Instagram talking about myself and going into these different cultures and talking about ritual and facilitating ritual in different workshops and events, and saying that unfortunately, due to my lack of education, there probably will be times where I do appropriate culture, but wanting to know that it's like talking about the not doing it intentionally and trying to learn at the same time. And majority of my demographic is white. And for you chimed in, and it wasn't a place of that's wrong or rah. It was more like, hey, let's talk about this a little more, you know? And then you and I went into a private conversation and unpacked so much of it, which I really appreciated, because as a white person, I can be quite intimidated for anyone that is a person of color reaches out to me. I'm automatically am I fuck, you know, get defensive. So I appreciated that. As well as I remember I grew up in a rural South Coast town that's by the beach. It's not much culture going on. And eventually when I come to Sydney, I started getting a bit more culture happening, and meeting different people of different ethnicities and backgrounds. But the people that I first met that really stood out of oh, whoa, I've got a lot to learn over a lifetime from these guys, was you and Elfresh. So it's really significant for me to have you here to continue that, however long ago that was, 5 years, to go, okay, I can continue to learn from this guy. And the last one is because I know you the least out of everyone here, and just even to Elfresh or anyone, I'm intimidated by you, which is really important for me to have you here, because I don't want it just to be easy, you know, because I've met Illuminati Congo and we've sat for hours talking, and me and Alice Knight, we've known each other for years and are in the same group. But because you're a fair few degrees away from me, and I somewhat pedestal you because I don't know you enough, it's cool, let's let's, by having this conversation, see where I can meet you in there. So thank you for joining.
I appreciate it. I don't need a pedestal at all, and I'm here to learn as well. But I also appreciate that it is difficult for some people to invite someone that they feel could, not that I'm going to attack, but someone that they feel intimidated by. It shows a sense of bravery to be able to be like, yeah, well, you know, I want to have that conversation. I don't want to keep it safe. I appreciate that, brother. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Alice Knight, I reached out to you because I remember years ago, I was sitting on the roof of the old House God Queen headquarters, and you had sent me a poetry book you're working on. And it wasn't the finished product, but I was reading the intro, and you started talking about, like, first you acknowledging the indigenous people of our land and talking about their culture, and then eventually getting to the point of being like, and I don't know what my culture is, and then going into it and looking at where are you from and what can you connect to. And to me, I was like, white people have culture? All this time I have culture? Shit. And like, and though I haven't explored it as much as I would love to, and this is why it's great to have you here, just to be able to like sit with that and be like, whoa, like we have culture, like somewhere down our lineage. Like that because I guess I grew up on hip hop. So just like, that was just any culture that I first jumped onto was that. And outside of that, there was just like, you know, the opposite was like Aussie hip hop, which is like barbecue rap and all this stuff. So I was like, well, that doesn't feel like culture to me. So I'm really excited for you to be able to come on and talk about what you've learned through that deep dive, and what you can teach to me and anyone else that's listening that is struggling to understand how we don't just take from other cultures and actually connect to our own and feel like an individual. And not only an individual, but connected to something that's bigger than just right now.
Super important.
So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And as I just lightly addressed with all of you beforehand, though this was the intention to come in and talk about cultural appropriation, I do know that this will also bring into what's happening in this current time, and I'm sure will still happen when this comes out, is all that's going on with Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and that the awareness that's really happening all across social media, across the world, across the news, in all the riots and protests and just the different things that are going on. So I'm excited and, again, just nervous to talk about all these things, but I want to be here for it. So I'm just going to start maybe just to give an individual question each, and then let's just start unpacking from wherever we go here. And I want to start off with you. Or maybe what's best actually is to go, if everyone wants to go around and just actually say what your heritage, ethnicity, lineage is, where you grew up and where you live now, because I think that context is going to be important to this conversation. If you would like to start off, Illuminati Congo.
All right. Well, I'm born in Chicago. My mom, the Chicago, Illinois, in United States of America. My mother is from Greece, and my father is melanated, called Black in America, and he did a DNA test on himself and found that he has connections to the Congo and Ethiopia in our ancestry, and we have Cherokee and also Choctaw blood as well in our. So that's as much as I know.
Beautiful, thank you. Alice Knight.
Okay, I'm just curious, where do you live now?
Oh,
Illuminati
me?
Congo. Yeah,
I'm in Chicago
in
still.
Chicago.
That's
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, beautiful. Cool. So me, I was born in Brisbane, and then I shipped over with my mother to England, and I spent my early childhood years in England, where all of my aunties and uncles and grandparents are. So I identify as Australian English, and I've also got German heritage in quite a strong way. So my mother speaks German, my grandmother speaks German, but they didn't teach it to me. They kept it as a secret language, which was annoying. Yeah, and now I'm living in Australia in the Northern Rivers, which is 2 hours from my birthplace. And I feel very much this strong love of the English land and sky. So I'm a two-person person. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
And Luka.
Yeah, so I was also born in Brisbane. My family, both sides of my family migrated to Australia from different parts of Greece. So, hey bro. So, we'll talk later.
I saw your smile slowly perk up, Luka, as you said,
Okay.
my mum's from Greece.
Nice. Yeah, so my father's side is from an island called Rhodes, which is just under kind of the bottom corner of Turkey. Long history of that place being colonized and recolonized between, the Knights of St. John during the Crusades to the Ottoman Empire, Portuguese pirates, the Italian soldiers during the Second World War, Nazi soldiers during the Second World War. And, in about 400 BC or so, there were 3 different kingdoms on that island that were kind of established in what we would call like the classical period of ancient Greece, which is what we think of when we think of the Parthenon and stuff like that. That's kind of that era. So it's a very multi-layered island. It's a really special place. So that's my dad's side. And my mum's side is from a part of Greece that's facing Italy, which in ancient times was called Archaea, which is where Odysseus and the Odyssey, and Ithaca, the island where Odysseus is returning to during the Odyssey, that's kind of that same region. So that's my mother's side. And my mother came to Australia as a baby with her parents. And my father's side, my grandparents met in Australia after exchanging a letter and a photo. And my grandmother came by herself and married a guy she'd never met and had 5 kids in 5 years. And the youngest is my dad. So that's the kind of 2 sides of my heritage in a nutshell. I started my poetic journey, I guess, which I would call another kind of lineage for me. Just over a decade ago. Started writing raps while I was procrastinating during university anthropology class. And eventually I moved to Melbourne. I started in Brisbane, but there wasn't a lot to do in Brisbane. So I moved to Melbourne, and that's kind of my creative home, I would say, my artistic home. And now I actually live in a very similar area to where Alice is in the Northern Rivers, in this beautiful place, which is a Ruckwell Bunjalung country, ocean and mountain and forests and good things. So yeah, now I'm here and this is kind of the creative base.
Beautiful. Yes, I love the Northern Rivers. I lived there for a decent amount of time, and it's just like, it'll always be a home of mine. I guess just to participate in it, myself, just white Australian. I grew up in Jervis Bay, which is 3 hours south of Sydney. I live in Sydney now. And as far, like, I think both sides, as far as I know, is like 3 grandparents back, and it's all just English, like all from England so far that I've seen. My dad and his parents were born and raised in New Zealand, but that's it. But just like, yeah, again, like white New Zealanders. Yeah, I actually like quickly like shot off my mum a message this morning. I was like, hey, because she's done a full family tree thing. I was like, what can you tell me about our lineage just before I jump into this podcast? And she's like, the most she had for me was like, your great uncle built the the Coogee pools, and I was like, okay, good to
Mad.
know. Good to know. I don't know how much it's going to help me today, but
Yeah,
good to know.
that's good.
So cute.
But yeah,
Hey, man, every little piece counts, man.
it does. It does.
To
It
build the
definitely
picture,
does.
every little piece is something.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I'd love to just jump right into that of building all the pieces and knowing that you yourself, Luka, have your Greek heritage deeply embedded in yourself and your art. And I'd just love for you to unpack a bit around you doing your DNA test, as you and I have lightly talked about this, and then you've done a big share about it, and just the realizations you've had from like what you've identified compared to what's been given to you through a DNA test.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just going to look it up again. It's interesting, man, because the DNA thing shifts as they receive more samples of DNA. So when I first did my test, it said 50% or so Greek and Italian. So because they only have a certain amount of people from Greece and Italy that have done this test, then they lump it into this one group. Whereas in ancient Greece, Greeks didn't identify as Greek, they identified as Archaean or Athenian or Spartan. They had their own tribes, their own identities, and they were autonomous places. So, it's kind of like the more samples we get, the more we'll be able to find out about the nuanced differences between these groups. But yes, it was interesting for me because I am visually browner than a lot of Greeks. I often get told by Greeks, oh, you don't look Greek. Or when I go to Greece, people assume that I'm Turkish or that I'm from Egypt or that I'm from another part of Greece, or that I'm Cypriot, which is, much darker skinned Greek heritage people, kind of, you could say is what makes up the island of Cyprus, the nation of Cyprus. And so I was interested in my ancestry because I wanted to see what else, was going on. And there was a high percentage of what they call Middle Eastern, a high percentage of connection to the Caucasus, which is northern Turkey, Syria, this kind of area, Azerbaijan, up into those kind of areas, as well as a bit of it's interesting, Jewish is the only culture and religion that can go together, only race and religion that can kind of fit together. So there was a small percentage of Jewish, small percentage from the Iberian Peninsula, which is Portugal and Spain. So basically I'm a Mediterranean through and through. And I learned a lot about, just heritage in general, and not just from that test, but also, from the way people react to me. And also learning that because my family's from coastlines or from islands, each of those countries that border the Mediterranean, whether it's Italy or Greece or Lebanon or, all of these different countries, the DNA is more similar between fishermen and their families that border the Mediterranean than they are between fishermen from Lebanon with other people from Lebanon, or fishermen from the islands of Greece with other people in mainland Greece. Actually, our DNA transgresses modern ideas of nationhood. So this idea of what Greek is, even that's a modern concept. What is Greece? Yeah, because in ancient times, that wasn't how we defined ourselves. And so when you do your test and you go, oh, I'm 50% Greek, that's really kind of trying to put an ancient lineage into a modern box to identify yourself today, which is very difficult to do. So doing the DNA test is a nice window, definitely. But, I didn't wake up with my knowledge. I wasn't born with my knowledge of my culture at all. I had to go on a very interesting journey, and I had to make a huge effort and learn, just like anybody learns. But that was like a conscious effort. It wasn't something that I just grew up with. I actually know more about my family, I would say, than my parents do about my family. So it's not that they just gave it to me. It was that I really made an effort. And interesting hearing you talk about, you know, I'm just white or I'm just English. I don't think there's such thing as just, you know. I think that a lot of cultural appropriation comes from people, white people, if we can use that word, diminishing their cultures to just, you know, I'm just this. And so I need something more exotic. I need something more interesting. I need you know, a dream catcher on my wall. I need the blessing of a shaman. I need this insatiable hunger, which cannot be filled with other people's cultures. It can only be healed by a look at your own culture. I believe, and understanding who you really are. Other cultures should inform us, and it's beautiful. But yeah, I don't think it's healthy to diminish our cultures,
Yeah,
diminish
that's a
our
language thing.
histories.
A language
Yeah, it's
thing.
just it's called also kind of a tall poppy Australian thing, you know. I'm just Australian.
Yeah.
I think that doesn't really exist, you know. I think that everyone has a history, and everyone's history is rich. Otherwise, you wouldn't have survived. Your ancestors wouldn't have been able to give birth to you. So
Awesome.
yeah, that's kind of my take on it, at least.
Yeah, and I like that. That's like, again, this, and this is the importance of this whole conversation to me, is just these little things I can go, oh yep, I'll write that down, I got to remember that, you know, like change just that little thing. If I just change that, and then when I take that away, I'm English, how much more can I take pride in that, and then go, okay, what do I want to further look into rather than dismissing it, you know, because you've just pointed to me, that's a dismissal pretty much. It's like,
and choosing
whatever.
which ancestors you want to be the ones you align yourself with. You know, the Greeks did horrible things too. The English did horrible things, but the Greeks did horrible things too, you know. I don't want to align myself with that version of what ancient Greece is, you know. Instead, I can align myself with the artists and the ceramicists and the spiritualists and the philosophers and the you know, and instead of just disregard, like being ashamed of being English because the English did horrible shit, they also did wonderful things. They also you know, made beautiful music and, you know, connected to the land in different ways.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something, I want to unpack more. And there was a certain thing you said around the lumping, like just being Greek, you know, rather than in past times you were all these different places, and this was a part of your culture. And it's something I'm super curious about, and I know next to nothing about, but doesn't feel like it sits right with me. And this is a question for you, Illuminati Congo, is the term African American. Is that, like, to me feels like, again, like a lumping, and is that something, one, that you identify as, and two, what is your thoughts on the actual lumping?
No, I don't identify with it. I think it was, that term is used to for convenience sake, but it also could be used for a psychological warfare type of way, because without having a nation, a national identity, one can end up being subject and subordinate to the nation that they are in. So there's theories that by people who have been classified as Black or African American not having their own nation, like Ethiopia, or connecting to Ghana, or connecting to the Wachita nation of Moors, who are native Black people in America. So there's actually nations that of indigenous Black people from America as well, that we can claim our heritage with, if we do the proper studies to see if we're linked with such things. And many Black people in America are linked with the indigenous people of America as well, who were dark. Many of them were dark skinned, copper color skin, and had nappy hair. There's just been a rewriting of history over the years that makes things appear totally different. There was also people that looked like white people in the Americas long before Christopher Columbus, and there was a range, according to other archaeological information that I study. I could bring out the documents now, but it's they're more fringe documents, things that aren't fairly accepted in mainstream science, but have validity nonetheless. And so, to answer the question, I don't feel that calling myself an African American and represents me or my nationhood or my ethnicity, and I don't feel it represents a lot of. It doesn't seem like a lot of other people feel that that word represents them either, unless they're just okay with what's given to them by outside agents or agencies or whatever.
So just so I fully understand, it's maybe not a mainstream knowledge that like it's a somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's not a term that should be really used as in like African American. It is a lump in is what I'm understanding.
It is.
And so you're saying throughout like the community, like throughout your community of people that you know, that is something, an identity that people don't really want to be labeled as.
Yeah, there's definitely circles of people who don't vibe with it, but it's like understanding convenience sake for people who their mind isn't ready to really explore what identity means. And because of that, it's just sometimes you just accept those terms, but those terms may be painting a picture that separates us from our land and from our culture, which isn't just a big Africa and a big America, but there are other cultural roots and differing cultures all throughout Africa and America that we have we're genetically connected to as well. So it doesn't really represent us.
Yep.
But white doesn't represent anybody either.
Yeah. Well, I seen you doing this every time it was white, black, and I wanted to talk about that a bit more as well.
Yeah. The word black comes from the word blanco and bleach and bleak, which means white. Blanco and blanch, to blanch something, means white. So the word black originally, etymologically speaking, comes from the word white.
What?
And yeah, there's a big mix up and turnaround. And what that means, what for all of us, I don't know, but it does seem like there's a lot of charades and going on when it comes to culture and mix up when it comes to identity. In Bouvier's Law Dictionary in America, people from Ethiopia and people from Morocco are labeled as free white people. This was the dictionary used by the Supreme Court originally, Bouvier's Law Dictionary. And so it labeled people that were African from Africa, they were called white people. And so there were those who in America who were black, who saw this law, and they began to call themselves free white people. That's how they began to classify themselves for securing their rights that were secured in that particular phrasing of who they were. And so there's a lot of mix up going on, and I don't want to keep talking for long, but because I'll get into a little more of it as we move forward.
There's actually, like, I know you're really well versed in etymology, and there's some actual questions I have about that as well, but I'll keep going and just thank you. And Alice Knight, in that frame of what Luka brought up to me of like just Australian, just English, just white, were you ever at that point? And if so, or if not, like, where was your turning point to go, I'm actually going to go down the family tree and see what my heritage, what my lineage is, who my people are?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. All right. So yeah, I'm just so enjoying being in this conversation and listening and learning. And I already want to watch it back, even though I'm here in it. So as we've been talking, I was just remembering this time in my life. I was in my early 20s and I went to study at university, and I decided I'm going to study Indigenous studies, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander studies, and educate myself. That was my strong feeling, educate myself. And I had the feeling of, I want to help. I want to do something. I want to participate. I'm living in this land and shit's gone down. It's been terrible. It's been atrocious what's happened here. And we're just living on these traumas. And then during the journey of that study, I want to tell you all about it, but I'll just tell you a couple of little moments. So the Indigenous teachers that I had, they kept doing this thing, which was turning the mirror back on me, on us, on the students. They kept saying, okay, you want to learn about Indigenous culture and Indigenous life? Look at yourself. Who do you know in your family line? How far back? Do you know your grandparents? Do you know your great-grandmothers and grandfathers' names? And it was really confronting, this question of, who the fuck are you? And it happened many times. And then even in a course called Indigenous Knowledge, the teacher said, if you want to know about Indigenous knowledge, go back to the place you were born and find a way to honor it. So it was a total spin of what I thought I was going to go and be exposed to. And also during that time, I realized I had a lot of shame about being white, and it was showing up in a really big way. And the way that I saw that, for example, was I was with a beautiful man who was also fair-haired and blue-eyed. And the idea of having children with him terrified me, because I didn't want to have white children. I didn't want to have white, blonde, blue-eyed children, because I would be ashamed of them and therefore myself as well. I didn't want to have children that look like me. And that's full on. That's a really sad kind of state of affairs, to have that much shame. That you don't want to reproduce something that is you or like you. So, you know, I think that's a pretty good snapshot of like where it got to for me. Confusion, shame, not knowing where I belong, not knowing where I'm from. And yeah, it's been a slow journey since then till now, of just opening myself to this potential of, hey, I'm from somewhere too. And, you know, for example, I don't have any ancestors that are buried in this land that we call Australia. There are none here. And I was in England recently, and I was studying with this mythologist, and he was saying, you know, where your ancestors have been eaten by the earth is where you're from, you know, where they are in the ground. And that's a big one to go, whoa, yeah. My experience of being in this place, Australia, is not a very long time. And so going back to England and going to the graves of my grandparents, powerful, really powerful to just go and sit there by their bones and see how I feel looking at the sunset by my grandparents' bones. Yeah. And then there's just this last little point I want to make, which is at some point I just decided that I'm Celtic. Decided I'm Celtic or pagan or something. And I don't have proof of it. You know, I don't even fully know what that means. And here's one other turning point. I was in Edinburgh maybe 4 years ago doing some studies in theatre over there. And I went to this exhibition. So I was there with the students from Australia. We were all on this trip. And there was this exhibition, it said Celts exhibition. And I was like, what the fuck's that? You know, I need to go in there. I just need to go in there. And so I left, all the other students went into this exhibition, and I was moved, like massively moved. It was so intimate. And I felt, I was seeing these objects, these ritual objects, these, you know, the shapes that were melted onto the cauldrons. And I was affected. I was emotionally affected and connected. And it's some way, it just felt like, yes, the sounds of this horn that was being played, this old instrument, just went, yes, 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 yes. And I think that was a really big turning point as well. And so then I asked this question of myself, which was, what is Celtic now? Because I also like to remember that cultures naturally change over time. They naturally change. And so rather than having to just go back and learn the old ways only, I also want to ask this question of, what is it to be Celtic now? What is a contemporary Celtic woman or Celtic person or pagan person? And so these are my questions, and it's a lifelong journey. And yeah, I now feel like I could have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child and love them and fully honor them and celebrate them and be able to show them and you know, that they are connected to beautiful stories as well. And I would be fully invested in exposing them to that. And so that's what I'm doing for myself as well, exposing myself to beautiful old myths and sites in the world that resonate with my body, and yeah, all that. So it's the journey.
Nice.
Awesome.
Thank
It's just
you.
so important.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's just so important because I think that in Australia, at least, especially I studied something similar to you because I found the same issue with growing up in a school. I just posted online yesterday, actually. I was the only person in my year 12 legal studies class that thought that apologizing to the, you know, tens of thousands of people who were taken from their families by the government in Australia was a good idea, that we should apologize for the stolen generations. This was in the year 2000, year 12 legal studies class. And everybody, including the teacher, disagreed with me and thought that was the wrong thing to do, that we didn't need to apologize, that it was too long ago, that if we apologize, it'll open up the doors for litigation and Aboriginal people will be suing us to take our houses back, and we'll be, you know, like we'll be left with nothing, and what's there to apologize for anyway, and all of this kind of stuff. And in amongst all of that, and it's interesting that you talk about hating or not liking, you know, having white children, is that there is a difference between white people and these theories around whiteness. So I agree, white people should always kind of be like this because it's difficult, you know, because it is in some ways as violent as the words African American, or as violent even as the word Aboriginal, which just completely
That's what I wanted.
demolishes complexity. And even when I say I'm Greek to people, like when brother Illuminati Congo says, oh, my mum's Greek, the first question I want to ask is from where? Because for us, Greek is not enough. It's like because every village is different. Every island has its cultures. Every part of the country has its own identity. And so these terms we tend to use for the rest of society to put us in the simplest boxes possible for them to understand. And often that means people of color are describing themselves in very simple ways so that white people or the mainstream can understand white people. there's Aileen Morton Robertson, who's an Indigenous academic, wrote a book about whiteness, or wrote about this whiteness theory, and that is that we are the blank page, and everybody else brings something exotic to that blank page. We are the normal, and everyone else is interesting at best, which is also a form of racism. This kind of multiculturalism. Well, oh, I love, like eating Vietnamese food, or I love having, like Greek baklava, like this is the kind of nice form of racism that comes with this idea that you're exotic and I'm just white. And at worst, obviously, it's severe racism and structural control and all sorts of different things that go with that. But I really feel like the journey that Alice has been on is the antidote to that. It really is. To be able to demolish this idea that white is just normal and just, everybody's foundation and society's foundation, and we don't have culture and we don't have anything, and everyone else comes here and brings things to the table. To being in some ways, if I can say this, and I think a lot of people would probably disagree with me, in some ways, when you reinvigorate your culture and your connection to being a Celt and to those stories, in some ways you become a person of color in a way. You start to become your culture, embody your culture, and you become someone who understands lineage, who understands connection to earth, who understands story, who understands mythology, who understands the care that it takes to make sure that culture stays alive over long periods of time and generations. And then you destroy this idea that white is the foundation of society, and you start to come in as another shade next to us with your own stories brought with you. And you no longer have this superiority complex that we control everything, we own everything, we are normal, and you guys are all different. Yeah,
right. Because Luka, I've never seen a white person or a black person. I've never seen it in my life in reality. Like if you look at a person's skin, it's never absolute white or absolute black. I've seen people close to it, but usually it's more earthy tones, like dark coffee tones or peach tones, and copper and bronze and tans and cream colors. I haven't seen a white person ever. I'd love someone to introduce me to one. But I have heard this word white being associated with things that are good. And I've heard this word white being associated with things that are benevolent and holy. And I've heard this word black being associated like with black magic and blackballed and dark angels. And so that issue there is the sort of the psychological warfare aspect that I'm speaking about, related to black and white.
Absolutely, brother. And I think that's why it's important to separate white, as in this idea of a group of people called white, and whiteness or white supremacy, which really is when people want to talk about, they say the word white, but what they really mean is whiteness or white supremacy. And we must make sure that we understand that basically means they're talking about a mafia, that there is a mafia of people that look kind of similar, that feel safe giving each other jobs and putting each other in power positions, that know each other from different, families, or know each other because they went to similar schools, that know each other from private education or from whatever it is. They feel safe around each other and they give each other support. And it is a kind of mafia that keeps other people down.
And they feel
whiteness, not just being white.
Yeah, and it's really based on unconscious fear that they feel unsafe. That's why they gather, because they're afraid of something. That's what it appears to me, that group of people who link together for whatever, to make themselves feel safe, is based on their fear.
Yeah, a friend of mine and I, after the protests on the weekend here in Sydney, were talking about, like, what if we gave the Indigenous people of our country like higher places in the government? What if one of them were our prime minister, you know? And we were unpacking the idea of like how terrifying that is in a like covert racist way, as in, like, for me, like, instantly my mind goes up to, and I don't like that this comes up, but it's just what happens is they will want to get like revenge or something like that. And this is how I believe the mafias, the white supremacy, that's what they're defending in this certain way. And
because they subconsciously think that people are going to act towards them the way they act towards others.
Yes,
which is why boat people in Australia are so dangerous, because when Europeans came to Australia by boat, they basically, they committed genocide. And so this idea that other people are coming by boat and they're invading and they're different and they're the other, which is, I think, is the fear that Illuminati's referring to, really, at an essence, it's fear of the other.
Yes.
Then of course we go straight to what would I do if I'd been oppressed for that long, if my children had been stolen away and I got into power, what would I do? But this is the incredible nature of, and we have to acknowledge that there's no First Nations Aboriginal people in this conversation right at this moment, which is important to acknowledge. But I think that the most amazing thing to observe, and I was at the march in Byron Bay this weekend, and I've seen it time and time again towards myself and towards others, is just how respectful, resilient, caring, loving, patient, understanding, and fair and just First Nations people can really be after they've been through so much. Revenge is not what they're after.
No.
Just equality is enough.
And
let's put it to rest.
It just speaks, by miles and just eternity by these protests and etc. Is like, for instance, when I was at this protest, the first like wave of Indigenous people walking down the lane, and they met all these white coppers, and they sat there and they controlled the crowd. It wasn't the cops controlling the crowd. It was the Indigenous people going, everyone, like, this is like, we're here to spread love and to not get violent and to show that we are one and that we deserve, that Black Lives Matter, and going on these topics, and just to show that resilience, of like, no, we are constantly trying to return to forgiveness and to love and to compassion and to understanding it. But it's, the whole movement of this is to go like, we want ours, we want to be seen in that we deserve, and that's been taken away from us. And I think that's what's scary is, like, for instance, like I was saying, like, coming into this conversation with the two of you, there's that, like, because I don't get to have these conversations often at all, like, I have these parts of me that need to be dissolved. Like I was saying, I'm scared that they're like, Indigenous people want revenge, but it's because I haven't had enough conversations to understand, like, and actually asked, hey, if you were in power, what would you want? Like, and to understand that the first answer won't be revenge. Like, I know that, but somewhere it's sitting in me. And
also that's not necessarily 100% solution, like, having a different person of color in a predominantly white power structure or a Western power structure that is based on economies and control and capitalism and hierarchies and money making and all these types of things. Those structures are inherently violent. And it was much better, I guess we can say, to have Obama in power than what the States has right now. But that doesn't mean that civilians weren't killed by drones by the thousands under that administration, because that is still the name of the game when it comes to, whatever we want to call it, neoliberalism, liberalism, capitalism.
Yeah, Obama was just a facelift for America. It was really done on purpose to paint a different picture of America for the world, because it was right at the heights of the Middle Eastern the fights against the Muslim world, if you can call it that, and to put someone in there who had the name Barack Hussein Obama, and the the world reacted differently, and it was another psychological move, psychological warfare being played out to sort of dissolve, in an attempt to dissolve some of the tension and throw us a bone, you know.
Mm.
Question on that: do you think Obama was aware of that? Was he part of that plan?
I don't think was aware of it. Maybe he's aware of it now. And I do believe he had actual, his heart has been in the right place. But then again, there's other stories from other circles of thought that say that he totally knows what he was doing, and that he's purposefully was acting in an evil way. I don't necessarily buy into that. I just think people have their upbringing and their philosophical models they work with, and it leads them to believe what they're doing is the best choice for the job that they have. And oftentimes it doesn't appear to be so, from we the people's perspective.
Do you think, even though that was possibly an intentional move by him, or on a from above, we can be like, oh well, that was just a power play move, it just fed into these different things about the Middle East? I've been coming to this point where it's like, yes, I can see from above, all the different power plays and how it all works into each other, and how, we're not necessarily changing the system at large and whatever. But do I still play my part, even though there are fault lines in it? Is it still better to have someone like Obama than it is to have someone like Trump? Or is it better to have someone like Trump because we get to see the mechanisms, open really to the world as to what happens, and the ugly face of it all?
Right. And that's what I don't know, because Trump seems like so much of a wild card, and maybe he wasn't planned on. I don't know though. I can't know for sure who planned what. All I can know is I've seen the media have the most hate for Trump, more than any other president. And because I know the media is connected to even deeper pockets of people who like to shape narratives, it made me look more into what Trump might be doing that is good. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I just didn't want to take the main stories I was getting without looking into things. And there has been some things that from this view of mine, it seems like they've been beneficial, but those are small in comparison to some of the other things he's done that seems to be causing harm to innocent children and families around the world. So just to look at both perspectives.
100%. And that was a part of why I got you on, is this the zoom out, the zoom in, like perspectives of like, and like Luka posed the question of like, in now time, in present, for what's going on, having a Black president, how much of an effect did that have on everyone to go, oh, like, okay, we have a Black president. Maybe I've got to have a look differently about how I feel about Black people, because now we're ruled by Barack Obama. And that's something I guess I've continued to learn more about, with us, all of us having our own spiritual practices and believing in our own versions of God. And I spoke about this the other day on social media, is the spiritual bypassing, which is both evident in like racism as an overarching thing, and also in cultural appropriation. This is something you and I spoke about, Luka, is like, yeah, and we've just spoke about this, like you said, Illuminati Congo, of like, I don't see black or white, I see all these different shades. And at first I thought you were going to go down this other spectrum of like, I don't see color. I was like, wait, whoa, I wasn't ready for that one. But as in, but that's what the spiritual community can do. It's like more so for the lack of better term now that I'm learning of white people, use is like, I don't see color, and then how like that can just take away so much, you know, from everything to give you permission to do anything you want, because it's you're trying to say your intentions are good and you've evolved past it. I'm curious to know from both you, Luka, and Illuminati Congo, as people that do believe in spirituality and are able to zoom out and zoom in, knowing, I think we can all agree right now, it is not correct to say like, I don't see color. And when I was talking about this right now, just the other day, I still do have a certain belief that zooming all the way out is that eventually, like, I guess in our most highest state, that this maybe, you know, to evolve past color could be a good thing. I don't know. I don't personally know, but right now that's not the way of thinking, as in like, you can't be saying I don't see color when there's very evident things going on where people of different shades are facing problems, you know? So I hope that's coming across right, of like, I believe in our highest spiritual self, that I guess our souls, do they have color? Does our spirit, does it have color? But right now the problem is there's a big problem with color. So yeah, I guess my question in short is, do you think in our very highest evolved state, in the most zoomed out way, that color is still existent?
Hell no. color is in the most zoomed out state, the canvas is blank. It's all empty when we go to the most zoomed out state. And when we go to the most zoomed in state, there's nobody who's black or white. So the people who talking about black and white, they are the most colorblind, to be real. They're the ones who are saying, they say is we need to represent our blackness, or we need to represent our whiteness, we need to represent our brownness. But if we got really into seeing color, we would see that there's, like I was saying before, there's details. There's a lot of details to it. So what are these terms? Black, white, brown, yellow. They're classifications. They're really outside classifications not given by us. Now, are there effects that happen from calling somebody black? Yeah. Are there? If I call myself black, I think in a certain way. If someone calls me black, they see me in a certain way. And if they see me as black, and they have a whole thing of ideas of what that means packed into their head, then they're loaded with these preconceived notions. And that's where the problem is with these color identifications that we call in people, because there's not an actual thing that's black culture. There's not an actual thing that's white culture. Those are racial terms that don't have, from my view, they're not rooted in truth. They're rooted in a convenient way to try and identify people that isn't necessarily giving the best identifying characteristics for a person. And so, are the effects of race real? Yeah. Is the illusion of race, does it have real impact in our life? Yes. Do we need to address that? Yes. But is race real? Not from my view. Not from my view. Are the different cultural and heritage and lineage differences real? Yes, that's real. But race isn't, for me, it's not really a thing. The black, white, yellow, brown thing isn't a thing.
Yeah, I think that's the question. If I can, instead of answering that question from the beginning again, I think Illuminati's really taken it to a beautiful place within the question is, how do we engage with those forms of oppression that base themselves on color, while
Mm-hmm.
we ourselves make sure that we don't get locked in the trap of seeing everything in those boxes? How do
Correct.
we engage in dismantling those things without saying, because I think a lot of times people, when they say I don't see color, they are they're getting themselves off the hook from needing to educate themselves on all of those nuances that Illuminati's
Mm-hmm.
talking about, all of those different
Mm-hmm.
cultures that make up what is now called black or what is now called white, all of those
Yeah.
different heritages and stories.
Mm.
And it is so diverse. Even Australia, we think of Australia as being Aboriginal before it was colonized, but actually it was multicultural before it was
That's it.
colonized. It
That's
was
it.
very, very diverse before it was colonized. So how do we engage with this conversation without falling into the trap of nationalism, without falling into the trap as a Greek person of being like ancient Greece were the best, or we invented everything, or, you know, which a lot of Greeks do? How do we jump into this conversation and dismantle and complexify really our vocabulary around each other, while making sure we don't fall into this trap of sitting in our corners and defending our corners and not allowing anyone in and not allowing ourselves out?
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
And that's a really big question. And I think it's just an everyday, how do we interact with our own cultures and with each other? I think a lot of the times when we go online, we tend to talk in broad brushstrokes because we're scared people won't understand our nuances. And that is where a lot of online fights happen, because people don't understand our nuances. They haven't read the books. I see Illuminati sitting in front of all these books. I'm like, man, I can see you've read all them books. You know what I mean? So when you talk, like, they come with you, you know, the nuance of that conversation comes with you. And if you just post that online blankly and it takes completely out of context, then it can be turned into something where you are being racist, or you are the problem, or you don't care about the liberation of certain people, or you know, and this is where it's become a bit of a trap, and it's almost like a perfect trap, this outrage way of selling newspapers or selling articles or selling advertising time, and also, you know, selling our own what would you call it, our own, you know, the information around us as a demographic online, what we post, what we don't post, what are the keywords we've used. All these things get sold, you know, all these things are a commodity. The biggest commodity is surpassed oil now in the planet is our data, what we've posted and what we've done online.
Mm-hmm.
So it's built to make us argue with each other, because it's always going to be out of context. When you're not talking to your next door neighbor in person, you're talking to the whole planet from your bedroom. It's always going to be taken out of context.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I don't know the answer to that question. I really don't. I really don't know the answer to that question. I want to be a bridge between those worlds. I think the only answer I've come across is a friend of mine named Alnor Lada. He was involved in an organization called The Rules that did a lot of social change work around the world. I'll share with you a video he did recently about spirituality and activism. And he said that activists often try to separate themselves from spirituality. They try and say that this is not a spiritual thing. We are demanding justice, and that's final. This is not about love. This is not about hearts. This is not about spirits. We need to dismantle structures, and that's it. And we need to fight for that and pull down statues. And there's nothing wrong with that as an idea, except that it doesn't allow for spiritual connection. It doesn't allow for forgiveness. It doesn't allow for healing in many ways. They don't want to talk healing. They just want to talk dismantling and changing. And on the other hand, the spiritual bypassers, they don't want to go out in the streets and shout their slogans. They don't want to dismantle things. They want to evolve by only manifesting.
Mm.
They only want to do group meditations around the world and manifest a better reality. Therefore, poor people aren't spiritual because they haven't manifested enough yet. And the structures that control them don't exist. It's only a spiritual world. Therefore, everything in the world is based on whether you can manifest a better life for yourself or not. It's like taking The Secret, that movie, to the extreme, where it's like poor people in different parts of the world are only there because of karma, you know, not because of racist structures or white supremacy or invasion or colonization. So that's the other extreme. But what happens when we marry those two things? When we have an awakened or a spiritual activism, when we have an activism, what they call sacred activism, which can sound a bit fluffy, but I think is the way to go. How do we improve ourselves spiritually? How do we make sure our spiritual work is, and even in terms of how many hours we spend on it, is equal to our activist work or our social work? And how do they feed into each other equally as much? And therefore the spirituality gets grounded, in action, and the activism gets lifted, and that's the only answer I've really come across. I don't know how that plays out on a day-to-day basis, but that for me has been a revelation in the past few months of being in isolation.
Yeah, there's fucking so much to unpack there, but that, like, I think, like, because I came into the world through like more the like activist, but I was attracted by the more destroy shit, burn the things, burn the banks, fuck the police, blah blah blah. And then I eventually got into spirituality, and I think I went all the way to that extreme of like manifesting, we are all one, we will manifest a future of a utopia. And then I'm like coming back now, and I'm trying to find that bridge.
I think that's good, man.
Yeah,
I think that's good, bro. I went on a similar, and the reason why I went all the way to the spiritual is because I met a lot of activists that were complete hypocrites, that treated their wives like shit, that treated their families like shit, that were like, there's a saying, everyone wants to change the world, no one wants to wash the dishes. Like I met all this crew that were just like completely cool online and on Facebook and in their music and whatever, all over the world. I met them. And they were so disappointing as human beings and how they treated each other. And so I definitely swung all the way to the other extreme. And I think now coming back to the center is healthy. And maybe you need to experience those extremes to get to that place.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for those extremes, and there's like so many pros and cons on either side, but it's just figuring out how to sit here. And I like what you said around putting, and this is something I'm working on now, and I definitely want to now, is like putting as much hours as I do into my spirituality into like my education on like structures and what's actually politically going on, and dismantling these different parts and what's going on in different communities. That education is like, okay, spending equal hours. That's like, and figuring out like, how rigid do I have to make that? Like, is it like, is it going to
where
be
does
like
my art sit? Is my art activism, or is it spirituality work, or is it both simultaneously, or neither? And it's not about being strict, but I think that it is a powerful way of working, of considering our process.
Yeah, and saying that, like, you all three of you are like poets, singers, like activist theater. I think you've like, I don't know if Illuminati Congo has been in theater, but all of you have done like significant bodies of art. And not only that, but you create and deliver it to the world, but you also all have forms of sitting down in a more personal context and teaching and facilitating and creating workshops and classes around these spaces. And I'm curious for like people that are at the very beginning, of understanding this bridge that we're just speaking of, spirituality and activism, and coming to the middle. What is maybe the first step for anyone that's listening right now? Like, what is maybe the best way, and is subjective, that you can go in and be like, here's a piece here's a seed that you can start to grow from now? Because it's pretty overwhelming, like a lot of this stuff we're talking about. There's so much to integrate, even for myself, and I'm sure for each of you. But what's just the first seed that can really help someone to start watering? And this is sort of open air,
Alice?
whoever wants to.
Yeah, I got one. So this is a way of writing that I was taught when I was studying theatre writing, and it's called the lull. And when you go into the lull, okay, so I just need to cite the originators of it. This woman, Sue Wolf, is the novelist who first came up with this term, and then my teacher, Stephen Sewell, taught it to us. And when you lull, you basically say a full yes to whatever wants to come out. And so it's like free writing, but an extreme version, where you really let the things out that you would often be too ashamed to even admit to yourself are there. And you just fully go in and you follow the tangents, you follow the strange characters, you let it get as fucked up as it needs to get, as shocking, as surprising, as confusing. All the puzzles, all the mess, all the dreams, all the visions, everything can be welcome in this space. And I think that's a really amazing way to write, because it gets some of the stuff out of us. It's like a detox of, you know, these thoughts that you're admitting here, Paisley, that you have, that many people have these thoughts that are like, fuck, I wish I didn't have that fucking thought. I wish I didn't have that response to that thing. I wish I wasn't like that. And so lulling is a really just powerful place to let things move, let things shift, and then also welcome in the mystery, welcome in a response, welcome in the healing through that process. And it's very personal, very private. So when you lull, you keep writing forward. You don't read back over what you've been writing. You just keep writing forward and forward over like a month or 2 months. You set yourself a time where you're just going to lull. So you get lost, and you have to get lost in it. It's a good thing. When you're getting lost, that's like fucking great. When you don't know what it is anymore, when you're stopping yourself from trying to corner it in to be a poem or to be a story or to be a whatever, it's not to be those things anymore. In depth, and things can move, and there can be catharsis, and there can be healing, and it's very liberating to let the stuff out that we would normally be too ashamed of. And then be able to go back into it, read through it afterwards, and start deciphering it, start, seeing where the threads are, seeing where these are maybe different characters that need to speak to each other on a stage, and, actually come to understand each other. There's so many different parts of us within us. So I think that's a very, very powerful practice, and also not to tell anybody what you're writing about. So that's part of the privacy. It's just for you, and you show people only when you're ready, only when you feel like, hey, look, I've been writing this thing, and could I share it with you? Would you read it, or whatever? And then you start to see where it might land in the community as well.
Amazing. Do you know if there's anywhere on the internet people can read about the lull and maybe get a reference point outside of here as well?
I don't think there is, to be honest.
Okay. Great. This is the exclusive.
But they
everybody.
can reach out
So
to
good.
Sue Wolf or Stephen Sewell or me. All the students, we learn about it in this particular training, but it goes beyond plot as well, beyond the kind of that fixed structure. And I feel like plot lines and the way our art is kind of organized in the world, it feels similar to the way the political worlds are organized, very, like drama, hype, this is where the conflict happens, blah, blah, blah. It's the same shit. So lulling is an opportunity to go into the mystery and trusting a different way of storytelling, a different way of expressing yourself. And perhaps in that space, something new might actually drop in that will, be a truly healing offering in the planet in terms of how we receive stories, how we tell stories, how we experience stories.
Huge. All right. More lulling.
More lulling.
All right.
Lulling for creation,
Beautiful.
And even lulling in conversation. Like lulling can be applied in so many areas of your life.
That's like freestyling.
Yeah.
That's like freestyle rap almost, when you get deep into that current.
Yeah. The best freestyles are when you're not trying to control it at all, and you don't know what's going to come, and it's kind of scary, but if you just let go, then it is an active kind of catharsis, and it is good to do by yourself, where there's no one that you're trying to impress with your freestyle, but you just let go, and some weird shit comes out, and maybe rhymes, maybe doesn't, whatever, but it's definitely a good warm up for me when I get to the point of about to write something or about to create something, going for a walk and freestyling and taking something to record that on if a good idea comes up, but just not having that as an intention, just like being free. Even after meditation, freestyling straight after a long meditation can really like complete that process for me. As a process of what you're saying, what people should do from, you know, if they're beginners, I would say if we're talking about people that don't have any experience in this and they're quote unquote white people from different backgrounds, and they're starting to look into their backgrounds and look at all, now I think there's a new generation of activists that are wanting to be born from this movement. I would just say, just listen, man. Just listen. Just spend the next 5 years listening. Like, it's okay to just say, I don't know, but have that inside yourself that I want to read, I want to educate myself, I want to listen. I think a lot of people want to be the expert straight away. They want to start the Instagram profile and put on their top of their thing, you know, I am activist, you know, Black Lives Matter, you know. They want to go hard out early, you know, and there's a thin line between us as non-Indigenous or people from different backgrounds in Australia that don't identify as Black or as Aboriginal. It's really important that we do educate the people around us, the communities around us, and we take that off the shoulders of Indigenous people to not always make it their problem to have to educate, you know, people, or especially older generations that might have older ideas about race. But it's also important we don't silence other people by putting ourselves at the front. It's really important that we don't. They say that a lot of people say, I want to be a voice for the voiceless. But one of my favorite quotes is from Arundhati Roy, which is that there's no such thing as the voiceless, only the intentionally silenced or the preferably unheard. So people do have voices, and it's up to us to amplify their voices instead of going, I'm going to be an activist from day one and I'm going to be at the forefront and I'm going to be the spokesperson, you know. Just listen twice as much as we talk, you know. Just really spend some time being a student of this whole thing and learning all the different opinions, because there's a lot of diverse opinions within these communities that we're talking about and talking with. So I would just say that just focus on that for a few years as your mantra. Just listen. Okay, I want to talk. Just stop yourself every second time you want to talk. You know, just, you know.
Yeah, that's something so important. And I guess, like, I'm curious. I want to hear your also answer, Illuminati Congo. But Luka, I'm curious within that as well. The like taking up space, you know, like talking before someone else has a chance to talk. And someone like, I'll just use myself as an example because I'm open to the critique, is like, and not that I'm going to say you're critiquing me, but someone that's not super educated in these areas, right? But I'm trying to learn and listen, you know, and I've in this time, I'm usually quite loud on my platforms, but in these times I slowly, you know, come back, and then just when I've got something that I feel is like, okay, this can serve, I jump out. But I know there's a lot of people that are like, they just rather be silent. And then there's also like, silence can be a version of covert racism. What would be a suggestion for people that are trying to find out like that balance of like, I have no education in this area, so my voice maybe not the best one to be putting out there, versus like, well, this could possibly also be a version of my covert racism, that I'm staying silent because I don't actually support this. Like, do you have any suggestion on how to, again, find the middle point of like saying something, but maybe not having to take up so much space?
Yeah. There's a couple of things I would say. One is there's a million different ways. There's many people as there are on the planet. That's how many different ways there are to be activists. Whatever skill you have, whatever desire you have, whatever way you wish to put your energy into changing the world for the better, there is an avenue for that. If you're an accountant and you're quiet and you're shy and you're good at numbers, but you don't talk out, you don't have a social media platform, and you don't, you know, you can do the books for an indigenous organization that can't afford their own accountant. And that can be a really strong, solid way to be an activist without needing to shout it to the world. You can support people, whatever skill you have. And if it's protesting and painting signs and chaining yourself to a tree, that's also, can be your thing. But if it's not, there is a way for everybody to do something. You don't have to be loud in that sense. And choosing when to be loud. If you're at home, I can't remember who it was, but I remember a conversation around an academic that I worked with, First Nations academic at Monash University, who said that there's only one thing better than him. He can't go into the dinner tables across Australia of all the Australian families and sit there and educate everybody at those tables. But white students or non-Indigenous students we can go and be the next best thing in our family dinner tables. And if all you're doing is just having a conversation around the dinner table with your family and changing one person's mind, or at least, sparking some sort of a question in one person's mind in a family that would never usually have contact with First Nations people or, oppressed people or people of color, then in many ways, you're kind of like a Trojan horse. You're infiltrating that space and you're putting forward some perspectives in that space. And those perspectives may or may not spark, they might spark fear, they might spark anger, they might spark compassion, they might spark lots of different things. But that's the next best thing to that, Aboriginal person needing to visit all of these families in order to educate them, is that we can do that. We can take the brunt of that racial hatred. We can take some of that on our shoulders so that, those people don't have to. And I think that that's really important, because when it comes to reconciliation and all this kind of being cool, my friend Rob Markham is a Jarwin man from Central Australia, from near Catherine. He was saying to me on Reconciliation Week one week at university, he was like, Aboriginal people are only, 10 to 15% of the population of Australia. So if we want to have a reconciliation, that means, and they say that they encourage white people to go and make Aboriginal friends. That means every Aboriginal person in Australia needs to have 8 new white friends. He was just like, it's not going to happen, bro. I don't want 8 new white friends. I'm trying to keep my culture intact. I'm trying to learn my language. I'm trying to connect with my land. I'm trying to, so educating each other and just doing those little tiny things. It doesn't have to be performative. Yeah. You don't have to perform it for the world. You don't have to show it to social media that you're doing the right thing. Yeah. There's a million different ways to do it, and you find your way, and you'll make mistakes and you'll get better. But just a simple commitment to those simple conversations and little ways of being of service to those communities. And listening and being humble in your approach to those communities instead of being a savior, I think can really go a really long way.
100%. And like, I find that really important to be able to have those conversations. And, it's so beautiful to see them happening. Like, if I go down to the shops now, like, people are talking about it. I guess everyone got used to having these conversations due to coronavirus, because it's like, it was so like everyone wanted to talk about it. It was just like, is unavoidable. And now, because it's sort of been on a trail of like this, especially here in Australia, like it was the fires, then it was coronavirus, and now it's the Black Lives Matter movement. So there's been a big topic at hand, but I feel like, I don't know, my theory is it's easier to talk about because it's been a thing going on in our life, and because I guess these two have somewhat collided in a way, in a manner of like, everyone was talking about coronavirus and everyone was social distancing and blah, but then like, it was like Black Lives Matter took more importance at this time, and people are, which is great, in certain ways. But it was just that like transfer over to like, okay, let's start talking about this. So I think that's really cool. That's great. Like, it's what's necessary. And And for people that are listening and people that are within my community, and knowing that everyone's artists here, there's a certain need for us to, I believe, I guess this is always what's talked about, is like, do our artists, people of influence, have to speak up about everything, you know, like, and there's a certain weighting. Like, if, say, one of my favorite influencers who is white, I'm like, are they going to pledge allegiance to this journey? You know, are they going to influence their crowd, you know? And I'm curious, I guess I'll pass this to you, Illuminati Congo, because you have the biggest social media following out of all of us. Is like the idea of like,
that's as good as a degree these days, bro.
Is like
social currency.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And like numbers, you know, like, it's like I guess I'm curious to know about this, people having 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000. Like, is there a responsibility with the amount of zeros that are at the end of their following to actually speak about stuff like this, rather than just having the conversation at the dinner table? Is there a certain need for them to also go from the dinner table back to their social media platform and say, hey, I had this conversation with my family, or hey, like, even the hashtag Black Lives Matter, like, there's no right or wrong, but I guess, what is your stance on people coming on and either being silent with it when they have an influence, or people that they can take measure with?
I don't hold people accountable to have to do that, just because if you're gonna do it and you want to do it, it's gonna be authentic when you do it, and then it means something. If you don't want to do it, I'm not gonna shame you or judge you either, because who knows what you're doing in your personal life. I'm not sitting around waiting on what the next celebrity is gonna do for the movement. I don't care how many followers they have or how much influence they have. Yeah, it'd be great if they got down and found a way to express something from their heart related to it. But I stand for liberty first and foremost. So I'd like people to act freely of what works for them, because people are ripening in different times in different ways. And it's not up to me to make a person ripen right now just because the media has said that this is what we need to be tripping about right now. We could show thousands of other videos of people getting killed by police and there was no riots. So why did it happen right now? And I think it's because you mentioned the fires in Australia. The forests and the bush is the lungs of the earth, and they were also happening in other places in Africa and the Amazon. That's the lungs of the earth. Then they said COVID was attacking what? The lungs of the earth where we breathe. And now what are we talking about? I can't breathe. That's the mantra. So something is happening related to breath and to the lungs. And I believe that is probably where if we went there to our lungs and our breath, we can solve a lot of the issues of the earth, not just health issues, but also the issue of unity amongst cultures and religion. Because the one thing we all do is breathe. It's like whether you're an atheist or whether you believe in whatever you believe in, breath is the one uniting factor. So I believe breath is being our respiratory system is being alerted, our re-spiriting system is being alerted right now, and that it's calling us to re-spirit ourselves in unity through the breath.
All right, back to the basis of breath.
That's what's up.
And I think that's a good
inspiration too. Comes from the same root. Inspire, to have the breath in us.
Mm.
and that inspiration to come through and create from that. So yeah, thank you for that observation, brother.
Mm. And the lungs, I want to see what I can find and deep diving into this lung theory of like, okay, this is all encompassing a lungs area. What can I read about that? And I guess to really get to the theme of cultural appropriation, it's great you speak about breathing, you know, and you're a breathwork facilitator, right? And you've learnt this from a certain culture, the ways that they breathe and they teach others. And then there's all these different people out here creating courses and workshops and studios that you come in and you pay. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on certain modalities, certain teaching, certain cultural practices that have been passed on across many generations. Do you believe they belong to certain cultures or certain people, and commodifying and making money from these different practices? Do you think that should be only belonging to certain people, or it should be everyone should be able to go, hey, I have a new workshop on breath work, it's $5, $20, whatever?
I do feel everyone has the freedom to share what they share. You know, my teacher Leonard Orr, he learned his breath work through almost fainting in a sauna. And by just turning the sauna all the way up and staying in there as long as he can, he read the sign and it said, don't exceed a certain amount of minutes. And he said, okay, I'm going to do that to see what happens. And when next thing you know, he found himself like trying to crawl out, breathing in a certain way. Then he was like, oh, let me try this breathing underwater with a snorkel. So he started doing this breathing in a certain way. And he discovered his own form of breathing right here in America.
Mm.
And then Babaji from India told Leonard, he was like, that is the American form of Kriya Yoga. You just brought that out of yourself, an American form of Kriya Yoga. And so for me, when it comes to spirit, respiration, inspiration, like we were talking about, this is spirit. This is everyone's right. And the people who develop the breath works, whether pranayama or whatever, Tibetan breath work or anything from ancient times, they definitely wasn't doing it to be like, all right, let's do this so we could come up, or so that our culture or that this identity could be upheld. No, it was really just for healing, just so that people could be well, so that they could be well. And so I don't think that when it comes to the breath work, there's cultural appropriation. Even the word, I look into the word cultural appropriation in culture. The word kul means to pull or to select. And so where did all cultures come from originally? It's just people selecting what worked for them, selecting out of this natural smorgasbord of earth. Okay, I like how this food is, this grows in this region. We're going to use this. We like how these fabrics feel. However, people's preferences developed around their culture, they culled and pulled that, extracted it out of the earth. And so it all really comes from the earth and from human creativity. And so from the earth and human creativity, people form these cultures. And does anyone own it? No. The word appropriate is good. I like to do appropriate things. Inappropriate is what we ought to be talking about when it comes to the conversation of cultural inappropriation. And that's when people aren't honoring the roots of the culture. And the only way that happens is if people don't realize that there are ancestors, there are people that came before us who this meant something to them, that we might not know the depth and the intricacies of all it meant for them. But if our heart and if we're authentic, and this is something we got to face, on ourselves. We got to look in the mirror to see how authentic we are about it. And if we face it authentically, I don't care what culture you're from originally. I believe that anything that works for us to make a better life is your birthright. Is your birthright. So if changing your name to Feather Bear is gonna make you feel better in your life, if you have a connection to that really means something for you, I don't care. I have native blood in me too from the Americas. So I say all of that just because cultural appropriation, it is important that we speak about it, but it's important that we understand where any culture came from in the first place. It's who owns the culture in the first place. The people, we the people. Well, which people? Because now it's starting to get so mixed up, and no one can really accurately pinpoint what happened in history. I can pull out documents from this room that show what they say is white people and black people and the whole spectrum in between on every continent since they started recording history. I can pull out documents from books from archaeologists, and these things, I don't know what's true. I can't hardly remember what happened last week. So to know what happened, 5,000 years ago, it's really, it's a stretch.
Yeah, and again, like I love the widening of that perspective, and this is again the zoom out and the zoom in, because Luka, you gave me a really good zoomed in perspective that actually, like, I was like, oh fuck, I can see that. Of you told me about ayahuasca, and people having that and going over to these places where the shamans actually serve it to people, and people go there for the experience, the authentic experience of where it is, but then they're paying high prices, and the people that grew up and it's a part of their culture to have this, however often, they can't afford it anymore. And this is happening from us grabbing from different cultures and not understanding the history of it. So could you give me a bit of understanding what you feel about that, for example?
Yeah, at an essence, I really do agree with Illuminati's perspective. Culture comes from the earth as its essence, as everything does, and we have a birthright to certain human rights, to certain connections to healing. And I agree with that. I think that what's happened is that authenticity is lacking, and through that authenticity being lacking, and that inability to observe long history and family history and connection to geography and connection to ancestry, that what gets involved is economics. And really, I think cultural appropriation happens when economics really does get involved. When you go and learn how to run an ayahuasca circle in 3 months of being in Peru, and you come back to your country and you're like, I'm a shaman now. And then because you have more leverage in your society, because people are more interested in seeing somebody who's not going to talk about the atrocities of colonization, is not going to talk about the histories of Peruvian, conquistadors, that it's safer to learn and do an ayahuasca circle with, a white guy that looks like you and sounds like you, and that, has a voice like you and a name like you, or whatever it is. Then that becomes the central economic point of sharing that culture, which then becomes the central sharing point of that culture in the Western world. And it is happening where there are, because it takes time for these trees to grow and be cultivated and then be turned into ayahuasca to drink, that because so many tours of people coming to try this are going to places like Peru, that it is happening whereby people from that area can't afford it, because just like the coca leaves in other parts of Central or South America that turn into cocaine and that are, you know, highly valuable and needed, or just like avocados in Mexico now, which have become a product that people are really fighting over and warring over, and there's a mafia over avocados, and locals grow them but can't afford them. Same with quinoa, the grain that's a seed that in the West now has become like a superfood that's cool for us to eat. The farmers can't afford their own crop of quinoa, which is an ancient grain that they, you know, have had access to for thousands of years. Or even with Palo Santo, which is, you know, the wood that we burn, that's become kind of cool for us, and that is a beautiful thing. It's become unsustainable because it takes so long for it to grow, and it's being paid for, you know, in other parts of the world at a higher price, that everyone wants to ship it off than to sell it to locals. And so I agree that at essence, we should all be able to access these beautiful things, and we should all be able to heal, and we should all learn how to heal. And I love that breath work is a part of this conversation, because I feel like that is so connected to who we are as an essence, that it's not like saying this is yoga or this is, you know, something that we pulled, you know, out of a culture. This man experienced it because it is so intrinsic to being human, to breathe and to learn how to breathe. And so I find that interesting, and it's connected to economics, but it also is connected to population and how many people have access to this thing. So for instance, I often felt uncomfortable around yoga festivals or yoga classes where there was no Indian input at all from anybody originally from those cultures. And I went to a festival in New Zealand, and there was an Indian guy there next to me, and all the teachers there weren't Indian. All the people offering food there weren't Indian. And this whole festival was based around conversations of people facilitating them that were at least 2 or 3 teachers removed from original teachers from India. And I asked the guy next to me, I was like, do you find this uncomfortable? Do you find this painful that there's all these other people teaching you back your culture? And he kind of I was confronted by his answer, where he said, no, I'm actually really proud that my culture has made it all around the planet so much that everyone's so in love with it that everybody here has learned it, and I can learn it from them without needing to go back to India. That he felt so proud that it had become so big. And I think a part of that is because it's not in danger of becoming extinct in India, that there are billions of people in India and hundreds of thousands of people in India practicing these things. And so even though it's become a massive industry outside of India, and there are problems that we can, observe within it, and I'm not saying that it's completely perfect by any large stretch of the imagination, there is an idea that still the center of that culture is in India. But still that the center of those learnings is still being held strong by the sheer numbers, population and people learning and practicing and connecting with Hindu culture and yoga and other cultures and practices within India. Whereas in Australia, for instance, or in United States, or what Native American people would call Turtle Island, there is a risk of white people becoming, or non-Indigenous people, or people from outside of those cultures, migrants included, of becoming the forefront of those conversations, of becoming the expert of those practices. And that's where I think it becomes cultural appropriation, or what brother was saying, cultural inappropriation, where it becomes inappropriate, where we've stood in front of people, and then it moves and shifts in ways that we control, and that can be dangerous, because then we're teaching something that we call yoga, but it's actually just stretching, because it has nothing to do with the culture and the philosophy of yoga. So this is where I think it gets the economy, the economics of it and the population, I think those two things for me have become big. And as a Greek person of Greek heritage, I see my culture in many forms all over the world. I see this thing that they call democracy being, talked about all the time. I wouldn't even, if you look at what democracy was in ancient Greece, what's happening now in the United States and Australia is hardly even resemblance of what democracy was. So this is kind of what I mean, where once economies and large numbers of people get involved, they tend to forget the origins, and that's where it should just be called something else rather than trying to say that you are representing a culture that no longer really has a say or a stake in your offering.
So it sounds like from the two of you, it's like trust what feels correct to you to go into as a form of healing yourself. And if you know that it's healing others, follow that, but also have the awareness of what it does on a grand scale, especially to the culture that it originates from, that is predominantly known that it's come from, and to be able to make sure you're not standing in the way of anyone.
I think it's even simpler than that. I think it's just, you can learn it, you can love it, you can be healed by it. You don't need to turn it into a business. That's my thing.
And you can give back if you do turn it into a business. Then make sure that you're giving back to that community in some way that makes it sustainable still for that original community that you got it from. If you do that, then you're helping yourself and the original community, and that's freeing two birds from one cage. So.
And that's that bridge that I think we were talking about
earlier.
That forms that bridge, instead of separating it and going, oh, it's too complex, or it's too difficult, or how am I going to do that? Or, instead of coming back as the expert shaman, why not fly over some people from Peru to hold those circles? Why not facilitate their entry into this space to be taught? And why don't, translate their teachings directly? And if you're going to open a shop that sells Aboriginal artwork, you better turn up to the protest, because Aboriginal people who have been fighting for their freedom, without those years and years of struggle and of social change, we wouldn't have access to any of these things. For ayahuasca to still be around, people have been fighting off, colonization in the forest. They've been trying to keep the Amazon clear of industry, and those fights, need to be supported if we're going to, be able to have access to those teachings and to those healings. That's it for me. I think it's difficult to just be like, this person got taught this skill and it changed their life for the better. That's so beautiful, man. Like Greeks are such, from when I travel to Greece, and there's some islands where a lot of refugees are coming now, and people are just opening their doors, like they're giving and loving, and it's just automatic, to practice what we call philoxenia, the love of the other, the welcoming of the stranger. It's part of who we are.
That's what my grandfather from my papu taught me about Greece.
Nice. Yeah, brother. So we can't ever deny that. I never want to shut that down. That's so important. I never want to say, no, I don't want to teach you anything because you're going to appropriate it, blah, blah, blah. I think it's beautiful for individuals to exchange ideas and teachings. And I think we did that, as Illuminati was saying, I think that we traveled and connected with each other across these continents for much longer than we think. People traveled long distances for much longer than we think. But when it becomes an industry, and that industry doesn't give back, and soon it morphs into something else, then that's what I would call appropriation. Not just the sharing of and loving of each other and connecting with each other, and making new ideas and healing each other. I wouldn't call that appropriation. That's love, and that's important.
100%.
But in those other forms where it starts to drain the places where it came from, and not give back, then that's what I would call the beginnings of appropriation. And I find that, it can be dangerous certain
Yeah.
cultures.
And these are the conversations that are important, you know, like to go, okay, where's it coming from? This is what I was trying to say earlier of like, okay, what is the root of it and how does this play effect? So if I am going to do something, how can I make sure that it's not effect, it's finding balance and actually flourishing, you know? I'm curious for you, Alice Knight, throughout your journey into your heritage and your background, what did you find in there that is a healing modality for yourself? Either something that is very prominent within the culture or something that just is little that you've started to use that maybe you could share with others that they can go, oh, okay, like if I have a similar background to you, maybe I can look at these places to heal myself.
The big question. I've been so churned listening to everybody. I've just been going into all these different thoughts and I've been taking notes and so much has come up. And now you've asked me this question. I feel like we could talk for the rest of the day.
Yes.
All right, let me just hone in on that. Okay, so actually what it brings me back to is this practice that my family exposed me to, and it's called Subud. S-U-B-U-D, Subud. It originated in Indonesia by an Indonesian man who started receiving this practice of latihan kejiwaan, which means spiritual exercise. I know it doesn't sound at all like Celtic pagan history or connection, but in the latihan, what it is that people from all around the world come together in a shared spiritual practice where you're surrendering to God or you're, oh my God, a bird just flew into the window.
Oh.
And fell down.
Surrender.
Surrender. So, you know, when I see that bird has just flown into the window and fallen down, this happened the other day as well in the house. I'm taking a different tangent right now. But because I think, partly because of my time with Subud, singing and sounding and in a surrendered state, it means that I have access to my voice in a way that is very, very natural. And it means I can sing to the bird when it's dying, you know? It means I can sing and I can respond to the world around me with presence and with love. And when I've been in these rooms doing the latihan with all these people who I can't even speak the same language of, you know, there's like 400 people sometimes in the international gatherings. We're all just in it together, and it's the normalest thing in the world. And I think actually coming back to the normalness of a spirited, present life has been one of the most important things. Like it's not a fancy thing that only some people have access to, or it's not a realm that you have to be from somewhere to connect with. Just by being on the earth, being a human being, is evidence to me that we belong here. We belong here because we are here. If we didn't belong here, we wouldn't be here. So just like finding ways to belong and finding ways to respond to what is actually happening right here. So that's like the bird flying into the window. I'm going to have a response to that. I may do a little love blessing for it. I'm not sure yet, but yeah, that's part of my belonging, is how I then interact with just what's right here, right now. So not feeling like an alien.
I think that comes back to the start of the conversation where you were talking about just being Australian or just being white, and then from that everything looks exotic. And a teacher of mine in Brazil said to me that we have to demystify our practices, that we have to normalize our practices. It's not about, you know, lighting incense and making the space feel foreign to us or somehow feel like it's this extra thing or this outside thing or this exotic thing that we're doing. That actually this is normal. This is normal life. Normal. There's an author from Chile. My wife's from Chile. His name's Alejandro Jodorowsky. He written a lot of books, and one of the things he says is to put something really normal on your altar. Just put like a lighter or a spoon or your phone or a piece of plastic or a plastic bag. Because in the end, most indigenous cultures that we connect with, they were just using really normal shit that was around them. A feather was an everyday thing. A stone is an everyday thing. Incense is an everyday thing. And so to demystify our practices and just be like, this is just normal. This is just everyday normal. This is just how I live, rather than seeing it as some exotic extra to our lives. And that sounds like what you're tapping into there, Alice. I really love that.
It's like my experience of singing as a singer-songwriter. There's no difference for me between that space and sound healing. Like, it's the same. They blur together. So just by making sounds, by singing whatever you're singing with presence, that's a sound healing if you're in it.
Does that make you change the way you write music? To heal more, or rather than bring up maybe difficult things to talk about, or? Well,
I mean, healing is my number one thing. It's my number one guide. I'm not understanding your question right now.
I mean, for instance, I have a poem about something political, some political issue, or something traumatic that I've been through in my life. I'm probably going to perform that poem a few hundred times in my life if it becomes one of those, staple pieces. And there's a line between kind of catharsis and cleansing that experience out of my body, kathara in Greek, to cleanse, catharsis, and re-ingraining the trauma, to repeat that story 200, 300 times, So I'm wondering if you're sitting down to write a song, and it's a song that might be played in a certain context many times over. Do you kind of maybe pull back from talking about something traumatic that you don't want to re-ingrain 100 times over, to make sure that song is truly a healing every time you perform it? Or is it more like, let's just find it as we go and see what it is at the end?
Well, my whole life journey is about looking for the alchemy in creation. So transformation through creation. So it's a lifelong journey to see, like, can art really do that? Can art really do that for me as an individual, and for the people that are experiencing what I do, for when I receive other people's art? Like, is it alchemy? Is it transformation in the areas that we most need it? And so it's a big, long, open question, and I'm learning as I go.
But your North Star is transformation, is
alchemy, healing, connection, belonging. I've got a question. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So my housemate and I, just before the full riots started dropping through and the Black Lives Matter movement got very, very loud, we came up with this arts collective name, Black Feather Creatives. Black Feather Creatives. And then just last night we were talking about it and just feeling like, no, we can't call it that anymore. We can't call it that anymore. The word black has got too much charge right now. And even though we're talking about black cockatoos or ravens or crows, and we're actually talking about black feathers and birds, we wanted to then change the name. And I'm just curious if anyone's got any thoughts on that. And, even this morning I put a post up and I referred to black female authors. And it's like, can I even say that word? I feel so confused. I feel so uncomfortable, because what am I supposed to say instead? So this is just my question.
Yeah, I think from my view, you're safe saying having the Black Feather Collective. That's like crows and so different birds ravens have black feathers, but people are too sensitive about stuff that they don't need to be sensitive about. And so if you say black authors, black female authors, there's no need for me to get offended unless I have a whole bunch of stuff going on within me. And if I have a whole bunch of stuff going on within me, is that on you? That I no, but to be sensitive to another person, if they respond to you, like, oh, I didn't like how you said that, and just to be sensitive to them, because I don't see how a person could get offended, but people have a lot of different stories going on, in their head right now. And I think it's just like your practice that you were speaking about. If a bird flies into that window of your post, you just meet it with that same practice. However, that sound could be in response to what might have came up in them. And the same thing for you. If a guilt or a feeling like wondering if this could offend someone comes up, meet that with that similar practice that you were speaking about. And because the word black is yours, and the truth of blackness is yours completely, just like the truth of whiteness is. So it's definitely imperative for us to all get comfortable embracing how all of these colors are part of the full color spectrum of our energy body, of even in our body. We're all carbon-based beings. We're all living things are carbon-based beings, and they say that carbon is black. So in a sense, we can say that everyone is black. So there's no problem with you saying black feather creatives, but being sensitive to people. It is a good consideration at this time still, to if you don't want to use it.
Huge. I love that. Thank you. I feel an amazing permission in that, to not have to know everything in advance, and instead to be in like a living dialogue with the world and with people, and that feels really relieving.
Yeah. And I think that when the anger does come our way, and we know that it's not from something we've done, or we can take on, the critique and with humility, but also understand that the anger, the hatred, the pulling down, the lateral violence within community members, across platforms, across genres, this hatred, this really deep-seated touchiness, this really real sensitivity and anger, that is an aftermath, that is a ripple of colonization. It's a ripple of imperialism that's still rippling out. It's that trauma that's still bubbling and still coming up and still needs to be healed. And so to listen to it, and to, as Illuminati said, to listen to it and to respect it and meet it with compassion and hear it, but also to not take it too personally, because we all need healing, and there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. And a lot of that, I've been, hit with that stuff in the past, and I used to take it very personally and very sensitively, and be very hurt and be shocked, to tears that I'd offended somebody that I'm trying not to offend the most. But it's really important.
That's signs of a good heart, bro. That's signs of a good heart, though, that you care that much. We big that up too.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that, man. Yeah, it is. You're right. It's important to be sensitive. It's important to. I think that's what resilience is: the ability to be sensitive and still be sensitive, but also not take it too personally and keep on our journey. Rather than what many people do when they get attacked like that is to close up and to go cold and to build a wall. And I think some people mistake that for resilience. I don't find that to be resilient in the long term. You're actually closing yourself off. But to keep having that open heart and accept our faults and understand the critique can be vicious sometimes, but that it's got a longer story than just that moment. When that one word offended somebody. And most of us as artists are not using vicious words on purpose. We're not using the N word, for example, just to prove a point that we should be allowed to, or we're not using, we're not trying to prove some ideological point by typing, all lives matter with the intent to to shut down a movement, you know, like none of us are really doing it with that kind of malintent, at least not in this circle of 4 people that I'm talking to right now. So yeah, there's longer stories before that moment of critique happens, and I personally, Black Feather Collective sounds mad. I like, you know, like,
Yeah,
I like a blackbird, you know, like
yeah,
there's something real wise about, you know, a crow that turns up at just the right moment when you're talking about just the right thing that it wants to listen to, or, you know, there's something real beautiful and mystical, and also, you know, very much from England and the UK, that image of a blackbird has been sung about, you know, over generations. So that's a beautiful thing.
yeah. That's your heritage.
Yeah.
So I feel like from here, a common theme that I've heard throughout this is like, you know, Alice Knight, you've posed the question of what is Celtic now, you know, and emailing you, Luka, and having a brief chat beforehand, you've used the term for your podcast, future ancients, you know, and we're all like sort of questioning what is the history right now, you know, like what's the history that we're creating, and I feel like conversations like this is where we discover who we are and what we represent by looking in the future and looking in the past and looking at now. And for anyone that is continuing on this journey right now, or beginning to figure out what's their Celtic now, or how are they a future ancient, for each of you as a signing off word, because we've been going for 2 hours, which is amazing, and I want to keep going, but I know we all have our lives to live. What is just any ending advice, words, philosophy, whatever it is that you'd like to share with the listeners, in whatever popcorn style someone wants to share?
I don't necessarily have any advice, but I do think it's good to know that these are all stories that we are telling ourselves at all times, that we have many different stories going on in our mind, and the histories that we've heard and researched or received oral tradition about, these are coming from people just like us, who received information, data, observed certain things, and did their best to try and report certain things. So or maybe not did their best, maybe did their best to try and change the history of things, depending on which book or which source we're getting it from. And so to know for sure what's happening in the past, it's not for sure. We don't know for sure. We can come to some fair ideas, and but even those aren't confirmed for sure. And then the same thing about the future. Nothing's confirmed about that. We don't know what's going to happen, other than what I'm doing this moment and how I am this moment can somehow create my future moment according to this moment. So it seems like our past, the way we view the past, is based on right now, based on our perception right now, and the way the future turns out is based on our perception right now. And so that future ancient concept that Luka is mentioning, it all happens right now. The way that we determine our past and determine our future comes from this present moment of creativity. and of writing that story the way it works for us, with respect to those who are rooted in some of the ancient stories, and with respect to those that we want to serve in the future with that wisdom of the past.
Thank you. Yes. Would anyone else like to share any final words to anyone that's listening?
Yeah.
Go, Alice.
Okay,
Ladies
I'm gonna
first.
go.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of things I want to say, but one is that there's this organization called White Awake, and they run a course called Roots Deeper Than Whiteness. And I haven't actually done it yet, but I'm about to do it. It starts in June the 21st, and I'm really excited about it. It's teaching about emotional resilience and political clarity, and I'm stoked on that. Roots Deeper Than Whiteness. I have the vision, as you were asking that question, Reese, of like coming back to that simple way of living that is actually before the modern life, I suppose you could say. Like have a fire, tell a story, sing some songs, hang out, like get naked, listen to old people, play with kids, like all these things that would have just been so normal for every single culture before modernization. And just remembering how fucking good that feels, or just looking at the stars, sleeping under the stars, sleeping outside, getting out of your house, all these basic things to just come back to the feeling of, yeah, it's good to be here, it's good to be alive, it's good to be a human being, it's a fucking beautiful thing. And I feel like something about it, those quieter times, or those more spacious times, it just means that shit will trickle off and we will expose ourselves to beauty again. And to be able to share in that beauty with all cultures is such an amazing thing. So I want to say that. And then there's one other point, which is I was once talking in this little festival setting about how I wasn't feeling anything. I was feeling very apathetic and really shocked at why I wasn't feeling anything. And somebody gave me this beautiful word, which was Yubinji, which is like kind of like down underneath your belly button. I'm pretty sure it's an Aboriginal word. I don't know from which nation of Aboriginal Australia, but this word Binji, meaning it's a place where you feel everything, where you can connect to the world and therefore be able to be moved enough to have a genuine response. And there's a lot of people out there, including myself sometimes, where I'm like, where is my authentic response to what's going on? Why can't I feel anything? And this idea that perhaps we've shut ourselves down in order to not feel. So when we do get that anger come at us, or that sadness, or that whatever it is come from us, we actually can't feel anything. There's a blocked wall there. So finding ways to open that Benji and just like to admit that actually we do want to feel, we do want to have empathy, we do want to be in connection, we do want to relate, we do want to be able to be quiet enough to learn from another person. And that means resensitizing the Benji.
Alice, I have one technique that I believe is great to get us in tune with that point you're talking about. And it's breathing through the mouth in a connected breath. To that point, you bring the breath down to that point and let it go with no pauses between the inhale and exhale, and allow gravity to exhale for us. And this breathing through the mouth will get the emotions flowing. If we haven't cried or haven't laughed in a while, that mouth breathing to that point, I believe, will be a great tool.
I feel that straight away as I just did a couple of breaths with you, and straight away there's emotion, and then I'm like, fuck, I gotta feel. And so then it's like, okay, yeah, there's some unclogging and there's some willingness to go into the emotion and the grief and the confusion and just letting emotions move without even knowing what the story is behind it. So willingness to feel. Thank you. I want to do a breathwork session with you.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we do that next week, same time?
Yeah.
No recording. Just
Yeah,
session.
just us. Just us.
Just workshop each other.
Probably so.
I love the concept of like you two have given to say, I don't know if you're in these windows, but this is where I'm assuming you are, is like, Alice, you said to be under the stars by a campfire on Earth, you know, and Illuminati Congo was saying like we're all connected by breath and we are all connected by these stars. Like we are all under the stars. We are all on the Earth. So I like the going back to simplicity. What's the most natural, easy thing? And that's what Luka was saying as well. It's like you don't need incense. You don't need candles. You don't need this. It's like what's the bare minimum that we all collectively have that you can connect to and just simplify and be, because you know we all here do a form of personal development and research and reading and learning from others, but there's just so much we can learn from ourselves, I believe, from just being in those spaces where there actually isn't anything to learn, but actually unlearning happening starts happening, and connection just comes back. Because I feel like sometimes it's not even learning that we're doing, it's like we're relearning. I feel like a lot of this stuff is inside us already, and that's why we have so many aha moments, you know, of like aha, or like fuck, like that deja vu kind of feeling towards information. It's just like, oh, like I think that's why in plant medicine we get that moment of like, oh, it's so simple, you know, I know everything, and then it slowly fades away as you go back to get on the computer or go talk with your friends or whatever, because you're not in that source point. So I like the simplicity that everyone's bringing us back to here.
Yeah, I guess it took me a while to find a finishing point, but everybody's just done so beautifully that it has just kind of appeared. But that present moment is really powerful that Illuminati was talking about. That when I was really in a deep depression and very close to taking my own life about 10 years ago, I had a moment where all of my past was horrible. Everything I'd done was a mistake. Everything that had been done to me made me a victim. Everything that had happened was wrong. And subsequently, my future was going to be horrible. I was going to make more mistakes. I was never going to heal. I was never going to be better. I was going to either end my life and make everybody sad, or keep living in my own despair. And as soon as I pivoted in the present moment, and I could pivot and see that my past wasn't full of mistakes and that it could open up and change, then my future also opened and became something that was going to be positive, that was going to be possible, that was going to be vibrant and healing. And a friend of mine said it might take you 10 years to heal, and it was almost the worst thing that I could ever have heard at that time. But now it's 10 years later, and he was completely right. It did take about 10 years, and as my mindset changed in the present moment, the past and the future changed as well. And that manifesting of those things, or the actual ability to see a different future and go for it, is accessible to all of us at, you know, in any moment. And then that took me to what Alice was saying about her own journey. And I remember understanding one day that people who perpetrate these kinds of violence onto other people, people who do culturally appropriate, who do colonize, who do, you know, act out imperialism in different ways, are also hurting. You have to be traumatized in order to enact that kind of trauma onto the world. And often we do talk about intergenerational trauma of indigenous people, and that is absolutely 100% real. You know, my grandparents, my grandmother's brother was killed by Nazis that came through the village. I understand that exists and it's real. But I don't think we should diminish the fact that there is a lot of healing to be done within mainstream society. There's a lot of healing to be done to deconstruct this colonial mentality, not only of consuming all these different things that are going to save me, but also consuming culture, consuming other people's traditions, consuming other people's ways of life with the same insatiable hunger that we approach consuming Nike shoes and Adidas tracksuits and other shit that we don't need. And to come back to that present moment, and to come back to the healing of a fire under the stars with friends and a good meal and, you know, humanity that is beyond, you know, what we identify with today in terms of labels and ideas and whatever is cool in the moment. That is just such a healing moment. And in our present day, and I'm absolutely 100% guilty of this, I think that if I'm going to make a big change, it needs to hurt, and it needs to take a lot of work. It needs to be, you know, difficult. It needs to be hard. And that's the only good work that is done. That's the only good social change that is done. But I'm, you know, constantly finding that it's the simplicity, it's the gentleness, it's the letting go. This is really, you know, difficult work for us and our mentalities of always striving. But actually, it's that letting go that is some of the most powerful work. Letting go and the deactivating our desires to consume and take and do another course and do another this and do another that. Not that I'm saying courses are bad. It's awesome to educate yourself, but to do it in a way where you can actually integrate it, not just do so many just so you can, you know, put it on your CV. And yeah, that present moment and that ability to light a fire and walk on the beach or hang out with friends or plant a tree or eat a tomato from your own garden, like these things go beyond all of the labels we have today. And for me, that's a step in the right direction to, you know, I used to try and educate everybody on every issue in the world, but you realize after a while that actually raising of consciousness means that people will eventually get it. As Brother Illuminati said, everyone's ripening at a different time. So trying to educate everybody through an intellectual process and match them at their ripening state and catch them and, you know, lead them by the hand in the right direction. This is a lot of effort for kind of minimal impact, really.
Yeah.
But a general awakening that I think Alice is doing and you're doing and we're all kind of doing in a certain extent, a general raising of consciousness and awareness means that we end up making better decisions anyway without needing the intellectual education around it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you,
man, for holding this. I really appreciate it. What a blessing.
Yeah, I appreciate all of you. And like, yeah, I appreciate just the ripening, as we're saying, like that I've had just now, you know, like this is great. I got all the sun, all the rain, all the different ways of giving me nourishment. And I just want to keep having these conversations. So for all of you, there's multiple topics. You know, this podcast for me isn't. I'm not here to just talk about cultural appropriation and all these different things, because we are all multifaceted humans, you know, that are curious to just learn. And I would love to have you all on again on different topics and meeting different people, because I love now that you all know each other, you know, and what possibilities of learning can come out from that by making more bridges. Seems to be the topic of this conversation, is like finding the bridge between these different things. So I appreciate that I extended an offer to walk across this bridge and you all joined me on there. So thank you.
Who knows, we might end up all creating our own new culture after this that someone will end up appropriating.
And there's the humor side.
It'd be an honor. It'd be a
yeah,
a total
honor.
I gotta say one more thing. Yeah. It's just right on the tip of my tongue, because I was talking about shame in the beginning, about feeling a lot of shame. And I just wanted to give a little kind of example of what I'm pretty sure has happened in Germany. There's these plaques. I've never been to Germany. These plaques that actually acknowledge what happened to Jewish people and the numbers of deaths. And there's a clear acknowledgement, and the shame is felt by German people in a different way to Australia, where it feels like Australia has been avoiding the shame for hundreds of years, for the entire time, avoiding the shame. And so there's just this term healthy shame that I was taught, through this program called the Hoffman process. Healthy shame. So it's not like shame just buzzing around, just this huge shame body, but it's actually the right amount of shame for what should be felt. Healthy shame. And same goes in personal lives, like when you fuck up, being able to say, I fucked up. I really fucked up, and I'm ashamed of what I did or what I said. I'm ashamed. And that being able to hold that is part of the health that I want to be able to integrate. And I feel like that needs to happen in Australia in terms of being able to hold a healthy shame, and that shame itself is not shameful. Actually, not having shame for shameful things is shameful. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, ironic but true.
Yeah. So being able to hold the shame and find out, a way where it can be in a some kind of balance where we can actually land with what is, and then be able to move somewhere different.
Yeah, not attaching guilt to the shame.
Yeah.
I
Guilt is
had a
useless,
post. Yeah, I had a post I just made, but the last line of it was, "Can't we all just shame along?" And
Really?
it was, and it was, instead of "Can't we all just get along?" And it was basically just in making fun of our shame culture that we're sort of in right now, where people shame you for not speaking up for this, people shame you for that, so I'm just saying, if it's a joke about the shame, but really saying it brought me to this awareness of how shame can be, if we all just embrace that everyone is being shamed and has some shame, then we can let go of the guilt, let go of the heaviness, and move forward.
Thank you.
Oh,
Can we all just shame along?
yeah. May everyone shame alone. Thank you, all of you. I
Pleasure.
really, really appreciate it.
Curious. There. She followed him and soon found herself falling very